Good morning, no mai, haere mai. Thank you so much for joining us on AM this morning. It is 15 minutes away from 7 o'clock. Now, I've forgotten the number of times that successive governments have launched a crackdown on gangs, but turns out it's easy to say and seemingly impossible to actually achieve because gangs, they are still thriving. The coalition government, though, has launched its crackdown on gangs. They did that yesterday, banning patches and insignia in public. They're preventing gangs from gathering in public, and they're making gang membership an aggravating factor in sentencing as well. Joining us to discuss this and a few other things is ACT Party leader David Seymour and Green co-leader presumptive Chloe Swarbrick. I can call you that, eh?
Good morning.
Great to have both of you here. Let's start off with gangs. Do you find gangs intimidating?
I think a lot of people do. They see these people gathering, they've got their patches, they've got their paraphernalia, which are instruments of intimidation. And I think people reasonably ask, why are one group of people allowed to make others in an area feel safe when they're doing it deliberately? I think it's time that the government push back, and I'm glad that we are.
Do you personally find them intimidating, though?
Well, I'm not going to say that I do or don't, because I don't want to give them the idea that they can intimidate someone who's part of the government. But I certainly know many people I represent and I've heard from say that they have been intimidated by gangs, and it's on their behalf that the government is taking action.
What about you, Chloe? Do you find them intimidating?
Look, Ian, I just think that baseline we have to acknowledge that people are intimidated, and I think that that deserves a response from politicians that is evidence-based to actually address the root of this problem, because I think, as you just were alluding to in your introductory remarks, Lloyd, we've had talking heads from politicians for decade after decade ignoring the own advice that politicians and successive governments have commissioned, which say that you need to invest heavily at the root of the issue, which is recruitment, alienation and otherwise that young people, in particularly in rural communities, are experiencing. But then we just continue to kind of focus on red herrings like patches and otherwise.
Is the patches a red herring, though?
Well, look, the evidence is contentious at best. At worst, we do know, based on Juliet Gerard, the Prime Minister's Chief Science Advisor's report from last year, that it actually has the potential to be counterproductive and potentially to alienate further. It also would mean potentially that you're even less likely to be able to identify gang members when certain disruptions are occurring or otherwise. So again, if we're to get to the root of this issue, we know full well, if you're to look at the data and the stats on our criminal justice system, for example, that the longer that people spend in prison, the more likely that they are to re-offend. We have something called, I believe, the Steps to Freedom payment, which is $350 when somebody exits prison. That hasn't been increased in 30 years. We're not dealing with the cycle of intergenerational inequality, poverty and criminality.
Can we talk about the gang patch ban? The Attorney General's yet to come back with advice, I'm guessing, to Cabinet to say whether it's lawful or not?
Any law like this will have advice from the Attorney General about whether or not it's compliant with the Bill of Rights, and there's going to be people who may say, well, it's freedom of expression and therefore to restrict the gang patches is wrong. But equally, there's an out clause, which is this acceptable in a free and democratic society? And in this particular free and democratic society, we've had the other guy's approach of let's be kind to the gangs, treat them as though they're victims themselves. What happened is that violent crime increased, the number of gang members increased faster than the number of police. The prison population went down, sure, but the number of people who are victims on the outside went up. So this government is now saying, actually, we're shifting our values as a country. We are no longer going to say that the criminals are kind of victims and the victims, well, we'll get to them later. We're going to say that some activities are unacceptable, and we're going to uphold the rights of ordinary people to go about their lives in this country.
I guess this is my frustration, Lloyd, is that we so frequently are talking about what it is that we're going to say or what it is that we're going to signal. But if we're actually talking meaningfully about how we want to turn the tide on these kinds of issues, then let's dig a little bit deeper. And granted, there might not be time to do that meaningfully on a breakfast TV kind of slot, but I think that it is really actually incumbent on politicians here to be honest and straight up.
Okay, well, let's do that. I'll tell you something honest. Under the previous government, the level of school attendance fell to record lows. This is a major disaster for New Zealand's long-term future. So, yep, I agree with Chloe that it's important to actually have good social services get in at the bottom. But the truth is, on the most basic metric, are kids going to school? They failed harder and worse and more disastrously than any government government in recent history on that issue. We are working very hard. So, yep, we can send a signal that gang behaviour is not acceptable in public. We will also work very hard to make up for what the previous government dropped the ball on, and that is school attendance and education. So you can actually do both.
So there's a bit of grasping at straws there. And again, I just want to make it really abundantly clear that the Greens were among many parties who are calling for the former Labour-led government to also follow the evidence when it comes to whether it's education policy or criminal justice policy. Labour also ignored their own advice in Te Ruki.
But hang on, you said you're one of many parties calling, but you're also opposed to politicians saying what they're going to say. I mean, come on,
talking about the difference
hang on. People will be watching at home. They'll be watching you guys at home bickering about this. Not bickering, but discussing. I mean, we're on a panel, right? But for decades and decades, we've had both sides going, well, your way has failed. No, your way's failed. And it's gone back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, similar to the discussion that we're having right now.
And I think
don't the people who pay your salaries deserve a solution that's going to work?
110%, and this was one of the core recommendations, I believe recommendation 1 or 3 out of Te Ruki, the Safe and Effective Justice Review. It said that we need to take this out of the day-to-day political hot potato that it is and deal to the actual evidence with
But how do you do that, though?
System. Well, we take the heat out of it and we say that we're not going to make policy on the fly and this back and forth between politicians
with the greatest
and we're going to apply the evidence.
Is this policy on the fly, though?
Yeah. With the greatest
when you're talking about banning
the greatest
gang patches,
respect.
Yeah, absolutely.
If they campaigned, this isn't policy. They campaigned on it, though.
And I'm sorry, Chloe, but just about everything you say is I'm evidence-based, you guys are all on the fly and political. I mean, that has become your slogan. The facts are that this government has looked into what works. It is not going to be enough to say maybe gangs are part of our community, and if we're just a bit kinder, then they'll start being kind back. That was the approach of the last 6 years, and it absolutely failed. We are now saying, actually, this community has some standards. We're not going to accept your behaviour, and we're going to do a lot of other things, whether it's school attendance, whether it's prison rehabilitation, in order to ensure that we deal with the other stuff that Chloe's talked about.
I'd say put your money where your mouth is.
This government is doing both of those things, and I think, frankly, I'm a little bit tired of hearing, oh, I'm evidence-based and you guys are just all rhetorical and reductive. Actually, this government is taking steps right across the policy spectrum to provide
let's look at what's happening in Australia then. You know, Western Australia's got a ban on wearing gang insignia and patches in public. Their courts are clogged with people, with gang members going, well, actually, this is against the Bill of Rights or freedom of expression. Some of them have won, then they're getting costs back as well. Are you expecting that to happen here?
Yep, I'm sure that if you go after a group of people who are causing disruption in the society, then they will access the courts and they will vigorously contest their rights, as they have the right to do. However, it's also critical that we don't say because they're going to push back, we'll just surrender at the first hurdle. And that is the difference. There's a whole lot of people out there who have been intimidated, who don't understand why. They do everything right. They pay their taxes, they get up, they send their kids to school, and someone else plays by a different set of rules. Well, whether or not people want to contest it, whether or not it's going to be challenging to enforce, we've got a government that says, actually, we stand for you and we're going to make sure that your values are reflected in the way this country is run for a change.
Have you met with any gang members at all, Chloe?
No.
Like to talk about policy or what they need or hear their concerns?
I haven't held the Justice portfolio for the Greens, but I have looked heavily into the evidence.
Has anyone in the Greens met with gangs?
Not that I am aware of.
Have you met with the gangs at all?
I've met with people associated with gangs. I haven't had a formal meeting with gangs, but frankly, I think we've got to be a bit more realistic about who we're talking about here. I mean, the number one reason I was told last week that men leave gangs is because they have a daughter and because they understand how gangs treat women. And it is absolutely disgusting. We have so much of this. These are nice people. If only we were a bit kinder to them, they'll be kind back. We've got to actually raise our sights in New Zealand and have some higher standards that we're not going to accept the kind of behaviour that gangs...
I mean, you're right.
Funnily enough, that was actually reflected in the Prime Minister, Chief Science Advisor's report, was saying that we actually have very little evidence and data when it comes to women's involvement in gangs. And again, this is kind of the key point. If we turn down the temperature a little bit and we bring politicians around the table on the evidence, then we do have an opportunity to move forward in a cross-partisan manner with intergenerational government commitment and actually also putting the money where the mouth is. Because part of the big problem here, Lloyd, is that successive governments have commissioned these reports which have said this is how you get to the root of this issue, but it costs a lot of money.
I know, but that's
so
what we've had. We've just had, you're right, we've had so many reports and reports and reports and reports, and we come here and we talk about it and nothing happens and the gangs are still causing chaos, and we're getting...
Because we think in 3-yearly political cycles.
I know,
That's
so
not good for anyone.
Why doesn't everyone just get into bed together and come up with a proper plan?
Well, because I'd say that our kind of parliamentary system is not particularly accustomed to it, but we do have some really good pathways in how we've done it over the last few years. I'd point actually to the Zero Carbon Act and the work that we did cross-party on end-of-life choice bill. We have the opportunity and the models to do this stuff, but we have to stop making policy in this soundbite rhetorical frame.
Can I just ask you about the ACT Party constitution talks hugely about freedom of expression. Where do you and the ACT Party sit with banning gang patches?
Well, we support the ban on gang patches for the very simple reason that this is a specific group of signs that have a specific purpose. They have no other purpose. It's a specific group of people that express it, who by definition, remember, a gang is a group of people with criminal intent. So we are quite comfortable with the idea that people that are using that kind of expression within a free and democratic society can have it restricted.
Can I ask a legit question?
Yeah.
Are colours included in that? I mean, how far logically does this kind of go? And that's the important point, I think, about practical application. So I'd hope there's proper and due scrutiny on this as well.
Yeah, and is it like, does it have to be a criminal gang? What kind of, I mean, is that all going to be defined in the law? The
law will define the specific gang. So these are organisations that are identified by the police as criminal organisations. And so far as Chloe's question, yeah, you can wear the colour red or you can wear the colour blue, but it's not going to have the same effect as specific insignia that are designed to link you to a criminal organisation and tell everyone in the area that a criminal organisation is present and that bad things may happen to you. That's the message that they're trying to send.
If you're banning gang patches in public, how are you going to identify who the gangs are if they're not wearing their patches? How are you going to know if they're all gathering in public if they're not wearing patches?
Well, the question of the patches is to prevent intimidation. If you can't tell as a member of the public whether or not they're a member of a gang, they're less likely to be intimidating you. Then you're back to enforcing on the basis of law.
But you're going to ban them from gathering in public. How do you know if they are gathering if they haven't got their gang patches on?
If you look at the people involved in any town in New Zealand, the police know who the gangs are.
Well, the police are also pretty forthright about the fact that we actually don't have one universal good list of gang members, because actually the kind of data that is consistently referred to, especially by the National Party throughout the election campaign, doesn't actually keep track of gang members who are going in and out of gang involvement and affiliation either. So we also don't have a lot of good data on this either.
Yeah, should we put this issue we've got to wrap it up. We'll put this issue to one side. Just sending our condolences from the AM show to you and the Green Party as well, because it's been a pretty tough week for you, losing Whaanana Efeso Collins, and you've got a big week ahead as well.
Yeah. If I'm perfectly honest with you, kind of been in quite a haze since Wednesday morning. On Tuesday night, we were in the parliamentary debating chamber, and myself and Debbie Ngāti were chatting back and forth about the government's agenda, and Efeso was in between us, and we all know that he was a man of God. Accidentally said a blasphemy and apologised to him for that. And just his booming laughter is the thing that kind of keeps coming back to me. You know, I think he symbolised a lot of the best of us in terms of humanity, humility, and the ability to bridge parliamentary and partisan divides by holding to values that are higher than, and ideals that all of us should aspire to. So yeah, my love and heart just goes out to his whānau and to our broader community who'll be impacted. I know those down south side in particular.
Well, he's got his memorial service later this week, so it's going to be another week of remembering a good man. Thank you for both of you for coming in, and yeah, good luck this week. That is actually to David Seymour and Green Party MP, soon to be co-leader, probably. Chloe Swarbrick, I do appreciate you coming in.
Thanks, Lloyd.